we're recording this session, so if anyone misses this or people want to share it with someone who wasn't able to be here, they'll be able to do that from our website. So welcome, everyone. I'm Caroline Elliott, the Executive Director of CREA. We're delighted you're joining us tonight for our speakers, Josh Royte of the Nature Conservancy and Landis Hudson of Maine Rivers, talking about work to restore free-flowing rivers and to recreate the amazing fish runs that used to take place in them. During the presentation, please mute your audios, and if the video quality is not great on your end, it can sometimes help to turn off your video. That can free up bandwidth to improve the quality of the video on your end. And the audio and video mute buttons are on the bottom left of your screen. During the presentation, please put any questions that you might have for our speakers in the chat box. Because of the number of people that we have registered, it's probably best to save all the questions for the end. We'll pull them from the chat box. And if you have a question that's very complicated and that doesn't lend itself well to typing out, just let us know what the subject of your question is, and we'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask it verbally. I just want to give folks a peek at our next two programs. Not this Saturday, on March 13th, which is a Saturday, we're hosting a workshop on identifying invasive plants in the winter. The guide is really knowledgeable and will likely have some tips in addition to how to identify them, the best way to approach removing them. The techniques that you use vary from species to species. So, and that walk is, because it's an in-person event, we're limiting it to 9 participants. So if you're interested in that, you should sign up soon. You can sign up on our website on the events page. And then on March 18th, which is a Thursday, Pete Dittesheim will be talking about the state of Maine's environment focusing on recent legislative action and challenges ahead at the state and federal levels. So join us for that. I want to thank the CREA membership and our programs committee because they make tonight's speakers and all of our speakers possible. We really work hard to find great speakers on important topics, and putting the programs together does take some time. There's one of the things that's wonderful about Maine is there's just an incredible amount of talent in the fields of nature and the environment and sustainability. And I feel as though that talent sort of hums along in the background, is known primarily to their professional communities. And what we love about these speaker programs is it's an opportunity to bring those voices to you. There's so much talent in our state and so much passion and expertise out there. And that's what we're trying to do, is share that with you. So if you enjoy these speakers and you aren't a member of CREA, I hope you'll consider joining us. We do a lot with a little, but new memberships help us keep our work strong. And one other note about what we've been up to, our camp director, Jenny Mueller, is really excited about, she's in the process of planning our summer day camp, where we weren't able to run camp last year, but we're really thrilled to be able to run it this year. We provide our campers with a really rich nature immersion experience, spending the whole day outdoors in community with their peers. And it's going to be all the more meaningful because of they're coming off of a really challenging year. So we're currently registering families who rolled their registrations over from last year, but we expect to be opening up registration probably around the second week in March. So you can find information about camp on our website, and that's where the online registrations will be available when we go live in March. So on to our speakers. Tonight, we're going to hear about how post-colonial development has altered many river systems and what's being done to restore free-flowing rivers and historical fish runs. And I'm going to stop sharing. And who's going first? Is it Josh or Landis? Josh?
Yeah, I'll start with an intro.
Okay, so Josh, why don't you share your screen? And while you're doing that, I'll tell you a little bit about Josh and
I need the host to enable it.
oh, did I not make you a co-host? Oh, I'm sorry about that. I was too busy chatting. Sorry.
No worries.
So Josh Royte is a senior conservation scientist for the Nature Conservancy in Maine, or Maine chapter. He's a landscape ecologist who brings science to strategic planning and prioritization of conservation and restoration projects. Josh has led the work to restore Maine River connectivity, reopening some of the region's best habitat to native fish and other wildlife. He also helps to guide and promote river restoration globally with Conservancy partners, including serving on the steering committee of the World Fish Migration Foundation. So take it away, Josh.
Thank you, Caroline, and thanks everybody for attending, and Landis for agreeing to do this together. This is such an exciting topic, and one I never thought I would be so enthusiastic about just a few decades ago. But let me move on through, introduce you quickly to the Nature Conservancy. This is our mission to conserve the lands and water on which all life depends. And we're global, not everywhere, but a lot of places around the world. We've got a lot of scientists. We're the largest private conservation landowner in the world, and have protected and restored over 3,000 kilometers of rivers. And Maine actually has a lot to do with our river restoration goals. So we were started in 1956 by this outstanding woman, Rachel Carson, who saw the Nature Conservancy starting in New York and thought that Maine deserved a chapter as well. And she started us off, and we've been going ever since. But most of our history has been working as sort of a large land trust in Maine. We've been protecting special places for their biodiversity, realizing and growing over time to realize that connected systems are better than isolated systems, and bigger connected forests are bigger than smaller unconnected forests. And so this has brought us to our current, where we've helped protect about 2.5 million acres of our 24 million acre state, and still own 300,000 of those acres. Often we'll protect lands that local land trusts or other organizations hold the fee under, that we've helped protect from development. And it's not just for nature, of course. This supports a lot of livelihoods in the state of Maine and things that we all hold very near and dear in terms of jobs and our economy. The Maine chapter in particular focuses on conserving forest lands, sort of what we're best known for. It includes acquisitions along the Boundary Mountains in the past few years, projects that we're working on in eastern Maine around Spring River. It's pretty exciting from the very bottom of Maine to the top of Maine. Our oceans work really focuses on ensuring not just sustainable fisheries, but that there's a robust ecosystem in the Gulf of Maine that produces enough of everything that we can still consume food from the oceans while maintaining a healthy ecosystem there. And so our projects here work on collecting data on the fishery, working with fishermen to test gear as we help purchase fishing permits, which allows us to reallocate quotas so that we can make the fishery a little bit more sustainable for each of the individual fishermen that work under those permits. We're also working, of course, on climate change. You could not work for the environment without thinking about the changing of the planet, one of the most dire threats to the environment on the planet. And so we're working to try to inspire towns with the low cost loans to invest in solar, working on legislation to help decrease the output of carbon and soak it up in our forest lands. And restoring free-flowing rivers is the area that I'm working in most these days, although I do work in pretty much all of our directions, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So I really feel that our oceans connect us from our headwaters and our rivers and streams to the main stems to the ocean. And our rivers are critically important for the health of the Gulf of Maine. And our rivers are changing as the climate changes, and we need to look for alternative energy sources. I hope that we don't continue to look at damming rivers, which is a huge impact on lots of ecosystems from the forest to the ocean, and often isn't a very big return on the dollar and expensive to maintain over time. I think Landis might hit on those topics a little bit more. But Maine has been known since it was first settled by Aboriginals, and then discovered by the Basques, and then settled by Europeans for its bounty of fish. And all the early settlements of indigenous people were along our waterways. People migrated from these waterways to sustain themselves in the springtime when fish were starting to run at the end of often very long, hungry winters. And one of the things that we've noticed is over time, these fisheries have declined and declined and declined. I'm going to hit on something here from this graph, which is dramatic enough, but then put it into this context of the shifting baseline. This brilliant marine scientist from France, Daniel Pauly, came up with this syndrome called the shifting baseline syndrome, where every scientist looks at their own life and their own career and bases the decline based on what they know, or maybe the generation before. But if you look at the stocks from that 1950 date that we looked at, and you look back in time, you can see the stocks were much higher back in the 1880s when Atkins and Foster did their initial fisheries report of the state of Maine. And they realized that all around the Northeast, fisheries were declining, and this was the reason for creating a fisheries commission to begin with. So look at this date. So they looked back as far as 1860s, but if you put this into context of what was seen in the 1814 period, you can see this enormous decline. There's a gap in the data. One of the reasons why they had commissions was to collect data. So we're getting used to these smaller and smaller runs of fish, which is unfortunate because there's a huge bounty out there that we could be restoring. So when we look at what's caused these declines, certainly water quality is one that has been huge in our history, from the industrialization around the settlement of our rivers, species that have come in. But the biggest threat that we've identified recently, now that the Clean Water Act has done so much to improve our rivers, is really blocked connectivity. So getting fish, not only to and from the ocean, but fish that even live in the headwaters need to move around from one headwater stream to another. And these free-flowing rivers also move sediment and nutrient and creates that dynamic channel that can respond to things like the changing rain and weather patterns. In order to figure out where to work, the Nature Conservancy worked with Fish and Wildlife Service agencies in all the northeastern states, put together information on 30,000 dams, and mapped the best places where there are native species, where there's upstream habitat that's healthy, and places where there's few dams as possible. That is, where are the best places to get the most fish back? And if you look at this map that's a result of that study, you can see a lot of dark blue in the state, an awful lot of river miles that are interconnected with few dams compared to other places. Great habitat, and also all our native species are here. This is also one of the last best places in the country for eastern brook trout. And you can see the yellows and the greens and the dark blues on this map, which show how much of Maine compared to the rest of their range is in really good shape for these beautiful species, which are dependent on cold water, lakes and rivers and streams. But it's not just about fish, it's also about a whole ecosystem of plants and animals and aquatic insects that rely on them, and the people that rely on those fisheries, both in the rivers, but also in the Gulf of Maine, and also take great joy in these places and the birds and wildlife they see around them. So connecting rivers isn't just about up and downstream, although it's critically important that there's up and downstream connections, but also into floodplains and healthy connected systems and rivers, like healthy connected systems inside our bodies, like our nervous system or our digestive system or our circulatory system. They're more functioning, they're healthier when they are interconnected. And this is all that much more important as the climate warms and fish need to seek refuge from overheated water, or seek warmer water in the cold times of the year, or seek more water, deeper water when there's a drought, and get out of the floods when it's flooding into the shallower water. So moving around in these ecosystems is super important for fish. So here's an example of floodplain connectivity from the Connecticut River, but it shows these salmon that did have access to floodplain forests in one stretch of the river compared to salmon on the left that didn't have access to floodplain. These fish are the same age.
Caroline, we're just seeing your picture.
Uh-oh. I don't know what happened. Hold on, I think we lost, I think Josh is,
We lost the speaker.
yeah, I think we lost Josh. We'll have to wait for him to come back in. So apologies, folks. It's technology for you.
Caroline, this is Lisa. I had trouble getting on. I think there's something going on with Zoom.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'd been on one prior to this and got completely shut down.
Hmm.
And we've had to turn off the Wi-Fi and do kinds of handsprings to even get this far. So I don't know where the problem is.
Landis, are you still on? Let's see.
I'm
if-
here. I'm actually calling Josh.
Oh,
My phone. But
oh, maybe he doesn't know that.
he's probably figured it out.
So we'll wait for him to come back, come back in. That's unfortunate. You weren't able to reach him by phone?
No. It's
Actually, let me put,
probably not on his cell phone as much as his laptop.
I wonder if, I'm gonna try send him a chat.
Aha, he's entered the waiting room.
There he is. Josh?
He's coming. He's coming.
There we go. Thank you.
Sorry, Josh. Apparently Zoom has been having some trouble tonight, but thank you for figuring that out. So
Yeah, can you allow me to share my screen again? That
yes, yeah, hold on a
for
second.
the third time this evening.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, everyone. I'm not sure where it kicked out.
It kicked out when you had the picture of the salmon, the large salmon and the smaller salmon, I think. It was around there.
Well, I went on to talk quickly about the Penobscot project, which I'm going to just skip through, but involved the purchase of 3 dams, the removal of 2, and the bypass of this third one upstream in Howland, which is a really cool place to see just a mile off the highway. If you haven't been there, it's worth driving by and seeing this nature-like fishway around the dam. We'd rather remove dams when possible. It isn't always possible because of local sentiments, and this is a case where this bypass actually passes fish quite well. So here they are passing through, and here's some of the ecological responses. The return of these sea-run fish, birds flying over the river have been documented to increase and have more offspring. There's more fish feeding on these forage fish when billions of these juveniles come out of the rivers every year. And that has affected the rate of increase in river herring, which in the Penobscot has gone from right around the few hundreds to nearly 3 million fish, again, creating billions of offspring that come out of the river every year. The economic responses have also been exciting, looking at places like the town of Benton on the Kennebec River, the Sebasticook tributary of the Kennebec River, where the income from herring harvest accounts for about 1/10 of the town budget. It also supplies about half of the lobster industry's bait in the springtime when they need bait early on. It has gone to provide food relief for people in Haiti, and we're still documenting the impact on increased ground fish in the fishery, but we hope that is something that in our lifetime we'll see a rebound of some of those ground fish due to this. There's also other social benefits from restoring the treaty rights to the Penobscot Indian Nation upstream who were deprived of the fish coming up to their reservation lands and their trust lands. And it also creates a healthier food source when you've got fish that were in the ocean compared to fish that were stuck in the stream behind dams. So this was the story I told you before, and then after was 62% of the habitat. But what this doesn't quite get to is the connections to the tributaries that I said was so important for so many fish. And that's where we got these folks involved, these stream crews. who went around the Penobscot watershed and then around the entire state, looking at every road stream crossing. And what they found is that a lot of them look like this, not a very good place for a fish to climb through. Even if they got up into that pipe with a tremendous leap, it's a very shallow, straight shot down the pipe. So we've now got more than 27,000 data points around the state, covering the entire state, and 30 to 50% of those are barriers. This is what it looks like. Known barriers, potential barriers, which about half of those are almost always barriers, and others are only part of the time barriers, but a very small percentage are actually passable all the time. This is of culverts. There are also bridges out that make up part of that. We take these data, we put it together with habitat data, and we help people prioritize where to work, where to focus their limited dollars to restore fisheries, whether they're the large landowners in Maine or their Department of Transportation or the Nature Conservancy, Down East Salmon Federation, Project Share, and of course, Maine Rivers. So if we can identify places that really have a lot of mileage, habitat for a lot of species, and could be done with the available funds that we have from all sorts of public and private resources, we can get more habitat restored quicker, get more fish into these rivers. They'll be healthier over the long run. So just an example, there's the VZ Dam project on the Penobscot, probably the largest project I've been involved with. But we also helped Atlantic Salmon Federation with the Fishway at Pushaw Lake Outlet, which now has annual runs of over 1 million alewives. And then culvert crossings in the town of Passadumkeag, where there was a crossing that was crushed and unpassable for fish. And it's not just a problem for Maine, of course. This is a problem for rivers all over the world, where there are dams and there's culverts. And a lot of these places are where there are inland fisheries, which we don't talk about very much. But in a lot of the world, like those places where these red squares are, there are enormous freshwater fisheries that feed over 100 million people their primary source of protein. So what we've seen is that there's been a decline in biodiversity all around the world, but freshwater species have really taken it on the chin the worst. There's been a 76% decline in freshwater species. There's been an 83% decline in migratory freshwater fish species. So what are we doing about this? Well, all these people are celebrating something we call World Fish Migration Day. It's something that I co-founded with Herman Monahan in the Netherlands and World Wildlife Fund in Europe, to get people to talk about their rivers, to celebrate their rivers, to get out and do things that'll really connect people with some of the nature that's often in their own backyards. In 2018, when people could still get together, there were 570 events in 62 countries around the world. There were 120 million people engaged through social media, 1,500 events that people pulled together over these past few years. We have it every other year. And it's gotten great press. We've also tried to put together materials that help people understand what the problem is, what you can do about it, and some case studies. So that's in a book from Sea to Source that I co-authored with some of those same folks in Europe. That is sort of a how-to textbook, and it's also a free download for anyone that wants it. And this has inspired work in Europe, the Dam Removal Europe project. And Amber is a European Union project that I've been advising for the past 5 years, also to take the lessons we've learned in Maine about collecting data, getting people excited about this work, and getting projects done on the ground. So here, just in sort of summary from my part, river restoration in Maine has taught us that there's a lot of support out there for restoration. It's great stuff, and rivers do come back. They come back incredibly fast. You know, I worked for years on forest restoration, where you'd have to wait 200 years for trees to grow to be really large enough to have cavities that could support the wildlife that would live in those cavity trees, and the soils to develop. But here in rivers, you take the dam out, the fish are there right away. It attracts people to the rivers. People have found that around the world, people have connections to riverine parks, tend to be healthier, happier cities where people want to settle. And I think we are happier, healthier people when we have that exposure to nature. A lot of work on that. So how do you do this work? How do you actually get rivers restored? I'm going to leave that for Landis to talk about in more detail. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Josh. So Landis, go ahead and share your screen. And while you're doing that, I'll introduce you. Landis Hudson is the Executive Director of Maine Rivers. She has a graduate degree in Forestry Resources Management from the College of Environmental Science and Forestry at SUNY. She's worked for Maine Audubon, the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and the Earthwatch Institute. And she has over a decade of experience advocating for rivers, including work to bring back a run of nearly 1 million alewives through the China Lake Alewife Restoration Initiative. So let's see, let me remove the spotlight from Josh and let me get Landis up here. Can you see?
Great. And can you see my screen?
We can see your screen, so take it away.
Excellent. Always exciting and yet still a little bit odd to be connected with people through Zoom. Well, thank you guys so much for inviting me to talk about the kind of work that I do. Josh and I overlap quite a bit, and it was fun to hear his description of some of the same kinds of work that I do. So what I'm going to be doing is giving you a little overview of the organization that I work for, Maine Rivers, talking a little bit about the scale of the problem that we're trying to fix in Maine, a little bit of history, and then talk about this large and pretty ambitious project that Maine Rivers is working on, and then share some information about other initiatives in Maine. So the organization that I work for, Maine Rivers, we are a nonprofit. We're an advocacy organization. We're a very, very small group, but we have a very broad mission, and that is to protect, restore, and enhance the ecological health of Maine's river system. So it's very broad, and we are involved in advocacy, outreach, and on-the-ground restoration efforts. The reason that I put this image, even though the focus of our discussion today is fisheries and rivers, to my mind, it's really not just the fish, it's the life that come from rivers that keep all sorts of birds, insects, and large creatures alive. So it's very much about restoring the health and vitality of large, vibrant systems. And now, whoa. Okay, so sadly, see, there are lots and lots and lots of dams in the state. And it just never ceases to amaze me how incredibly energetic people were 100 and 150 years ago when European settlers were coming to Maine and just building dams galore, grist mills, and all sorts of energetic business that we still find. And unfortunately, in addition to having huge, tremendous impacts on the health and vitality of our waterways, they're also old infrastructure, and very, very few of them have any remaining purpose. There are over 100 hydropower dams that produce power, but the vast majority of the dams in the state are just relics. About 10 years ago, a woman named Carolyn Hall was doing her master's research, and she was studying the impacts of dams and was referenced. And what she actually went on a road trip and visited archives and libraries throughout the state of Maine and created an inventory of all of the dams that had been built in pretty much all of the rivers in Maine. It was a pretty interesting undertaking. And she counted up 1,356 dams all over the state. What was shocking was not that they had an impact, but the scale of the impact, which is to say that, as we saw in the graphs that Josh shared, they really have vastly closed down our waterways for native migratory fish species, like salmon, like alewives, like sturgeon, that need to move from freshwater to saltwater back and forth over their life cycles. And if they are not able to do that, they don't reproduce and their numbers drop. So what was interesting and frankly kind of shocking with this inventory that Carolyn created was that the majority of this 1,356 dams are still around. So we have many, many old dams in our waterways, and they have a huge impact. And they reduce the vitality of the entire Gulf of Maine. And they really are something that it's difficult for us to quantify, difficult to imagine. But when spring came 100, 150 years ago, people were aware of alewife runs. And it really, the surge of energy that came from the ocean with shad, with alewives, brought our ecosystems back to life after a long winter. So animals would come out of hibernation. People had probably been running out of food after a long winter. And these creatures that were coming in to spawn in freshwater would be eaten by all sorts of creatures and bring energy with them. So lots of mysterious and interesting life cycles, including you can see a hand holding a little teeny tiny eel. Eels are the opposite of the other migratory species. They come from the Sargasso Sea and then live the opposite of all of the other diadromous migratory species. So my organization, we're a nonprofit advocacy organization. We are involved in trying to find ways to improve the health and vitality of Maine's waterways. We are involved in keeping track of legislation in the state, occasionally federal legislation, and trying to support and encourage restoration efforts wherever we can do that. In 2014, my board of directors decided that it was time to essentially refocus our energy on the Kennebec River. So Josh mentioned the Penobscot, which has been a truly superlative success story, not only for Maine, but really, I think for the entire world. The Kennebec is, I think it's fair to say, where restoration and our concept of improving the connectivity and working to bring back fish runs really started in Maine. And I would say actually really started nationally. So in 2014, we decided to organize a day-long conference, which was held in Waterville. And it was to focus on the Kennebec. And the Kennebec is, of course, our second largest watershed. And this is where just about 21 years ago, the Edwards Dam was removed from the Kennebec River in Augusta. And that really changed the way that people think about rivers. The river truly did come back to life. And 21 years ago, it was a pretty shocking idea to remove a dam for the health of the river. After that project, the upstream dam, the Fort Halifax Dam, was removed shortly after that. And the fish runs, particularly the alewife runs in the Kennebec and Sebasticook watershed, have just exploded to become the largest in the entire East Coast. It's absolutely amazing. And it's something that I think in Maine, we to some degree take for granted, the fact that we have these magnificent rivers and beautiful, healthy lakes. We also have possibilities to restore our native sea run fish that are completely impossible to imagine really anywhere else. So in 2014, looking at the Kennebec, one of the very serious concerns for my organization was the 4 main stem dams on the Kennebec. These 4 dams are hydropower dams. They are owned by a very, very large and very, very wealthy company, Brookfield, which owns most of the hydropower dams in the state. And their fish passage functions just basically don't function very well. So back in 2014, it was very clear to us that Atlantic salmon were both endangered and the prospects were not being resolved with the kind of speed and focus that they needed to be. So we decided to bring attention to this by organizing the conference. And out of that came our interest also in working on a restoration project with non-hydro dams. So my organization continues to be working as part of the Kennebec Coalition to bring attention to the 4 main stem Kennebec dams, which are posing very severe problems for Atlantic salmon, as well as all of the other co-evolved species. However, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but right down here is China Lake. And this is where we took on a project to work on 6 small dams. And up here you can see the town of Winslow, pretty close to Waterville. These 6 dams were in a relatively small 7-mile stretch of the China Lake outlet stream, which had been dammed for hundreds of years. And agencies had identified China Lake as a large body of water, which could be an excellent place for alewife restoration. The only problem was these 6 relatively small dams. And we went to work creating a coalition, a partnership of groups to focus on improving fish passage for alewives to get them to China Lake. And that's what we've been working on since 2014. And a couple ideas here. We have been focused on this effort with the idea of being able to restore a run of nearly 1 million adult fish. So those are the fish that spend, 4 or 5 years of their lives in the ocean before needing to return to fresh water to spawn. And the number of juveniles that would be produced in a lake like China Lake is just, colossal, huge. A vast number of little tiny fish would be making their way out of the lake into the stream, back out to the Gulf of Maine, where they, a few of them will survive, but the vast majority of them would be eaten by any number of creatures, fish, birds, all sorts of creatures. So one of the reasons that people have been enthusiastic about this is the potential for restoring alewives, as Josh pointed out, brings local revenue in. There's also the hope that it might improve the water quality of the lake. Challenges involved in a project with 6 dams. Lots of challenges. A lot of people found the prospect exciting and bringing back large runs of fish. However, it was also very difficult to talk to people about it. I put this picture in here. This is the first site where we worked. And what you're looking at, the water that's reflected there, is a mill pond, and it had been there for hundreds of years. And I think in many people's minds, when you talk to them about removing a dam, and underneath this kind of disheveled building with the metal roof, yes, there is a crumbling dam, which hadn't been taken care of. I think the last repair work was in like 1959. So it was pretty seriously falling apart. But in people's minds, they think of this idyllic and beautiful mill pond, which Josh and I will tell you is tend to be warmer, full of invasive species, and really not the kind of resilient, connected water body that ecologists will aim for. So people have this idea in their mind, and you say, well, we want to restore alewives, and were interested in taking out the dam. That's going to be an effective way to do this. In their minds, they will see giant mud flats. So the reason that I've shared this with you is that this is an eternal challenge to people in the realm of river restoration. When you talk about dam removal, which is generally the most cost-effective, the most efficient way to improve connectivity, to restore the flow, to allow fish to move upstream and downstream. The most effective way to do it is to remove a dam. And immediately, the idea of a mud flat comes to people's minds. In this particular case, we had lowered the water down behind a dam so that we could measure the amount of sediment. Removing a dam has a great deal of permitting details. So we had to collect a lot of information. And these are my two superlative colleagues, Nate Gray from the Department of Marine Resources and Matt Streeter, who works for Maine Rivers. And this is a rare time when you see two guys wearing waders with a pair of snowshoes. And this was so they could go out on the mud and not sink into it. However, the reason I'm sharing this with you is that the idea of removing a dam and having a gigantic permanent mud flat is not true. It's just one of the ideas that always comes up and is constantly a topic of discussion. When in reality, when you remove a dam, and you can see this is actually where that first dam was removed. This area here was all underwater. The revegetation comes in really quickly. And within really a matter of weeks, this is the type of scene that you see along a stream. So this is the outlet stream where we removed the first dam as part of that China Lake Alewife Restoration Initiative. And it is definitely different, but it's hard to say that it's not just as beautiful. You can see the native plants and shrubs growing along the stream. And I share this with you in contrast to the fear of the eternal mud flat. And this is another image from the same place. You can see the remnants of the dam off in the corner. So we worked hard to make sure that the plants that grew back were native species. And that's been a part of the work that we've done on the China Lake project in the two sites where we've removed dams. The other two sites where we've completed projects so far, we've had to build fishways. So technical fishways are typically highly engineered, very, very detailed work has to be completed to allow the correct amount of water to flow through the structure and allow the fish to move upstream. So this is the fishway that we built at the second dam, which we essentially had to keep in place because the impoundment had become a favorite place for local kids to swim. And so we built a fishway there, and you can see up here, this is the fishway. And here we have our engineer, Joe, standing on it, checking it out, and the dam in the back there. So this was definitely difficult to construct, and it took a lot of time and energy to plan it over several years. We had to put grading on it so that people wouldn't, walk into a fishway, which would be pretty dreadful. Aesthetics were also important because this is a project in town, and we worked very closely with the owner to make sure that we're meeting his needs. So let's see. Okay, this is the site that we worked on last summer. And the reason I put the picture of these guys with the hard hats, of course, wearing masks, was really to represent the years that we spent bringing people to the site to look at it and help us figure out what we were going to do here. So this is the old box mill site. You can see a little remnant of the box mill building. There was a dam that breached in the 1970s. So it wasn't really possible to simply remove the dam and get the stream back to what it used to be like, because we believe that the entire stream had been moved so that the flow could be directed to the mill. So there's a very, very big old brick mill. So we took several years to figure out how we were gonna install a kind of functional fishway here. And the image that you're seeing of the little waterfall, trust me, it's huge. When you're standing at a distance, it doesn't look so big, but when you're trying to figure out how to get 1 million fish over it, it's really big. So this was at the beginning of our construction season. Of course, just about a year ago, we were coming to grips with the cost of construction, which was, I would say, colossal. Trying to come to grips with the fact that this pandemic was coming into place, which luckily the company that we hired worked through it carefully. And we also had aesthetics to consider. Ray, who is the property owner there wearing the red bandana, was, how shall I say, consistent in his communication about the importance of creating a site that was nice to look at and beautiful, because this is a place where people would go to take pictures of their kids graduating from high school, or after the wedding. They might have the party in the old mill. So we had to combine a vast amount of engineering and fish passage along with where will the bride be standing when they come to take a picture of it. So it took a lot of work. And here you can see what things were like during the construction. The fishway was created out of concrete, but first they had to make the forms in wood. So all of the wood you see in the up image there was put in place while the concrete was poured in, and then it was taken away. So that was a huge project with a lot of rebar, colossal amount of work to figure out exactly the progression of each step of work that had to happen. Work is only allowed in streams in the summer, so you have to do all of your planning in advance, and then you have a very tight window of time. The image on the bottom left, that's me wearing my fancy orange safety vest. Ray is sitting next to me, our property owner, who was there every day keeping track of what we were doing and making sure that it was fitting with his vision for the site. Next to Ray is Nate from the Department of Marine Resources, who luckily lives in the neighborhood and has been just an amazing partner on this. And Matt Streeter, who is also there, making sure all of the pieces came together. And then I love this other picture because it just looks like such a huge undertaking, and it really was. So this is what it looked like when it's done. The fish have not come through it yet because we completed it at the end of last summer and early October. But we're really pleased because it fits well in the site. We were trying to combine aesthetics of the old mill and make it a place where people will want to come to see the fish in the spring, and they can do that safely. We actually, after years of visiting this site and kind of having to stand at the precarious and steep stream bank, we have now beautiful steps down. So we're looking forward to celebrating it. However, in talking to you, I have to tell you that every fishway, every technical fishway, much as we celebrate, much as we are thrilled with how beautifully it was created, it is a lot more work. It's just so much more complicated than dam removals. In some places, you simply can't do a dam removal because of the ownership or the site, but we really try and talk about the importance of getting rivers back to their free-flowing state in the simplest and most cost-effective ways we can, partly because we know there's so many sites where these kind of things have to happen. So this is one of the reasons that our China Lake project has worked as well as it has. This is also in the town of Vassalboro, where the outlet stream is found. This is from another restoration project on Weber Pond, and a big shout out again to Nate Gray and Frank Richards, who is the Weber Pond president. They worked on this smaller, but nonetheless complicated, nonetheless expensive restoration project. And this alewife harvest at the top of a technical fishway, and they're either being sold for lobster bait or sold and shipped to Haiti. So what was great about this for us was that the town was completely familiar with the idea of managing an alewife harvest. And they were very supportive when we talked to them about the idea of eventually having a much, much larger run. And in fact, some of the revenue that we've used for our project has come from the money that the town has earned selling fish. Along the way, we have brought in 5th and 6th graders to learn about the project. And sometimes we've gone into their classes, sometimes we've brought them out to the site. One day, one of the 5th graders was telling me that they were learning yoga. So I asked her what kind of yoga she thought alewives would do. So this is their, alewife yoga pose. We also have the kids planting trees and coming up with some pretty hilarious names for the trees. So getting them involved in learning about not just the restoration of the fish, but also native plants, and helping them think about the ecology of the land and water surrounding them. So that's been really fun. It has been a complicated project with lots of different partners, agencies, towns. Each site has been a bit different. This is not a complete listing of the sources of funding. We've gotten funding from a number of foundations, and each site has been different. And it's been just a quilt of keeping track of all of the different sources of funding for doing the work that we need to do. And right now, sites for next summer. So that's what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. And I wanted to finish up with a little bit of information about other places, because the challenges that we see in our rivers and streams with dams, with bad fish passage, with poor water quality from the impoundments are really widespread. Pretty much every city and town in Maine has a river running through it. And every river should be full of life. And the numbers of our sea run fish are terrifyingly low. They're at something like 10%. The idea of a shifting baseline is in fact truly terrifying to contemplate the loss of biodiversity and the impact that we have had, particularly on our freshwater species. So the problems that we find are very, very widespread. And frankly, it's very slow to try and address them. So I share this with you. This is from the city of Gardner. There's an energetic and wonderful group of people that are trying to bring back alewives to the Cobbessy Stream, which could support up to 3 million adult alewives. That is just a colossal number. There's a lot of potential there, but it's taking a lot of work to figure out the logistics. There are 3 dams that have issues that need to be resolved. So these guys are collecting alewives below the first dam, and they will be measuring them and collecting data about them. So that's pretty cool. Yarmouth, the town that I live in, also has two old dams that serve no function anymore and have non-functional fishways. And there used to be a lot more dams. The Mousom River, which runs from Sanford to Kennebunk and out to the ocean, heavy sigh. 3 dams that have been going through a long, kind of painful process as the entity that owns them has determined that they have essentially no hydropower value anymore. So the community has been trying to figure out what to do with them, and we've been working with local people to collect information about the fish that are making their way to the base of this dam, which you can actually see is that bridge is Route 1, so it's really right in the middle of town. And the river has a tremendous amount of potential. 2 years ago, our relatively newly elected governor came out to Weber Pond and was there to get up to speed on alewives. One of the great things that's happening in Maine now is that our Department of Marine Resources is looking at the Kennebec River and making clear their higher expectations for fish passage at these 4 main stem dams owned by the gigantic company Brookfield. So since that conference that I mentioned in 2014, I have seen no signs of progress of improving the very, very serious fish passage problems that are keeping Atlantic salmon endangered. There's actually an updated management plan. There was supposed to be a hearing last week, but it got canceled because of the snow. If you're interested in learning anything more about that, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. But it's an exciting time now to know that our state natural resource agencies are able to share a vision of restored health of rivers and building on the work that Maine has done so spectacularly with removing the Edwards Dam, the Fort Halifax Dam, the Penobscot River revitalization work. We have a lot to be proud of in this state, and the work that happens here has changed the way that people think about rivers throughout the United States and throughout the world. But alas, there's a lot more work to do. And this is why we're doing it. So these are kids from Vassalboro who will be growing up with a stream that runs through their town that will have alewives in it, will have more eels coming to it. And they will still have the old factory nearby that used to be the industry where their probably great grandparents worked. But our hope is that they will grow up with a restored and vital river. And so that's it for me.
Great, thank you,
Trust me,
Landis. There are all sorts of questions in here, some of which Josh has been responding to, but I want to share his responses and see if you want to add to them. But before I get to those, I just had a question for both of you, which is, you know, if people here are interested in what they can do to help restore Maine rivers, you know, from sort of the, you know, very the simplest things to the, you know, full-on 7 days a week involvement. What are the range of things that people can do to get involved with the work of restoring Maine rivers? Do you want to start, Landis?
Well, I think there are, sure. Getting kids outside is huge and important. And obviously it's hard to do now with COVID, but think ahead and try and find ways to help kids be connected to the natural world. Anything we can do to make sure the next generations have a sense of love and a sense of wonder and an interest in science, that's all good and that's all important. So that's kind of a general thing to do. And then you know, as I said, every river in the state needs help. And most of our rivers have a group of people trying to improve it one way or another. So do a little bit of research, get to know, find out who else is interested. And, you know, a lot of the same challenges can be found, but it helps to find a group of people that are working on it and collaborate with them. And maybe Josh has some thoughts.
I've got a slide. I'm gonna grab the screen, Landis, and just share this. So Landis, I mean, I love that your first point is really to get out and get inspired, because I do think that is beneficial not only to us as advocates, but to get other people inspired and then get educated, so that when you do speak out at a town meeting, or you do testify for a bill, or even just voting, you have the information, you know it. And when you talk to your friends and neighbors and family, you come at it from a really educated standpoint. So there's a lot of great information out there, and that allows you to inspire others, participate in government, as you can see here. There's state bonds, there's the highway bond, which helps with covered road crossings. There's often infrastructure bonds. We don't have a great stockpile of funding for dam removal in the state of Maine. Some states do. I saw that question from Sally Harold. There's some states that have programs just to help dam owners get their dams out. In Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, I put some of them in the question and answer there. But you can also help improve the data, not only on where there are barriers, we don't always know where they are. So if you come across one in the woods, you can make a note of it and come back and look at the mainstream habitat viewer and see if that dam or abandoned culvert is on the list already. And then we're also collecting data on species, so we can help prioritize, to Steve Pelletier's question. If we find out where the fewer dams are, where the best habitat is, we can often get sort of the best bang for the buck solution. But we need more data on where these different species are, especially the sea-run species. So we've started a program with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, Department of Marine Resources, and Downey Salmon Federation to create these sort of inventory plans that citizens can follow and log their data onto a common site that helps managers make decisions about where to work. Join work days, get help with grant writing. I'm sure Landis can always use help with getting information out, and donate generously and often. There's so many groups that help this work, but if it's a river that you're particularly interested in, there's probably a local group that you could work with to work in restoration there. So a lot to do. So we love when people get involved, but I really think Landis is right. Those first steps are get out there and see how wonderful this is, and get excited, and bring your kids and your out of town guests. And someone asked when to see alewives. Landis, you've got a map you created, which is pretty wonderful, that shows where to see them.
Yeah, we created an alewife trail map 2 years ago and then last year, and you can find that on the Maine Rivers website. And generally, you know, May to June. And there are all sorts of places all over the state. So yeah, you can find that on our website. It's something fun to look forward to.
That sounds great. So I just want to run through some of the questions that popped up in the chat box for those who might not have seen those. Someone asked, what are the political issues that make your work difficult, and what can the public do to promote river waterway improvement?
What are the political things that make our work difficult? Let's see.
Big long list.
Yeah. Sheesh. Gosh. I mean, changing people's minds and helping people understand the importance of, the challenges that we run into with rivers are not different from land conservation, but unfortunately, revitalizing rivers generally brings you to discussions around dams, and those are not easy. They are slow, and it takes people a while to really understand what you're talking about and think about the the value of restored ecosystems. So it can be slow, and there's an educational component to it. I would say under the LePage administration in Maine, everything was more difficult. All of our state natural resource agencies were diminished, both in terms of the number of people working for them and their abilities to do things that strike me as basic common sense. There was this, in fact, actually, there was oh, look at this. I've got this Maine hydropower study from 2015, which was done and essentially showed that no, there really is no new place to develop hydropower in the state. And yet these kind of ideas persist. And not only are there no really great places to develop hydropower, we have a bazillion old dams that do nothing. So one of the challenges we run into is this just people go back to ideas that aren't really true, like, oh, we need to build more dams. Well, no, that was pretty well taken care of 50 or 100 years ago. And by the way, you know, that's not the new industry. You know, that's, you know, the impacts that we are seeing and expecting from climate change, you know, dams already produce those terrible impacts on our rivers. They are already causing numbers of our natural species to be in decline. They are already messing up our temperatures. So yeah, Josh, you want to answer that too?
You know, I put some of my ideas in the chat. So you know,
Okay.
some of the same things and funding sources, and
Yeah.
there's also permitting and rules, and how we make things easier to fix rather than make it easier to destroy, which took a little bit around roads and culverts to get that. And even with dams, how can we make it easier to make the river better in the long run, even if it might have an immediate impact for a few months or so, because rivers really do restore themselves quickly if we give them the chance. So
Right. I think one very, very basic thing is that, you know, part of the reason why I think it's great for people to get out and get to know their rivers is that there's always this sense that, well, somebody else owns it or we're not allowed there. And, you know, these are our rivers. They're our water. They belong to the people of Maine. And yet there's this sense of otherness. And I think the more people get out there and connect to it and get to know it and realize the beauty and the life that's there, and also the life that used to be there and could be there. You know, a lot of it gets to our concept of private property and what kind of, you know, whether it's an okay thing to have a dam above the head of tide that essentially closes off an entire watershed. So it involves a significant amount of thinking and then rethinking. So people need to think and then rethink.
Mhm. Well, and I think people get very attached to seeing the landscape as they always have.
Mhm.
And those before and after pictures that you have are, I think, really powerful in showing, you know, after the mud flat has been revegetated and being able to see the free flowing river. And as people see the life return to the upstream areas, I think that is powerful. So part of it is making that visible to people in whatever way you can.
Right, yep.
Jeff asks, what are the particular challenges to restoring the population of Atlantic salmon?
yeah, I put in the answer, one of the primary things is just their survivability in the ocean is so poor right now. The hatcheries are helping put more juveniles into the streams. We'd like them to breed and reproduce naturally, but they needed help for a lot of years now. But a lot of those fish don't make it back from the ocean. There's changes in the types, it's the size and nutrition of food in the North Atlantic that's affected all the species across the entire ocean. And we've seen species range shifts, and the salmon haven't shifted into those ranges. And there's, you know, hazards along the way, on the way up and back. There's also, as I mentioned, some hazards that come from aquaculture in Maine. So the thing that, Landis and I and many other organizations are working on as well, we might not be able to fix everything in the ocean, but we can make as nice a home for them when they come back to their spawning grounds and rearing grounds as possible by connecting as much varied habitat that'll bring them through good years and bad. So we're really in quite a tight race with the salmon because there are so few coming back, but there are hopeful signs because so much has been restored in Maine, but it is getting warmer too. So that's another big challenge for salmon.
Yeah, I mean, the way things are in the Kennebec now, there's a pretty amazing egg planting program that goes on where folks from the Department of Marine Resources actually plant fertilized salmon eggs into the streams in the winter so that they have, they are coming into the world where they belong. However, those same creatures have to get through a gauntlet of dams to get out to the ocean, and that's not pretty or easy. And currently, the only way for them to get back to their habitat up in the Sandy River is by truck. So there's been, these creatures are only alive because they're essentially on like emergency protocols. They get to Waterville, and then some years it's 50 fish that are put into a truck and brought up to the Sandy River. So that's not a viable plan for getting creatures off an endangered species list. So there are problems, but that's a pretty real problem.
Chris asked if you could again summarize the status on the 6 dams in the China Lake outlet stream and sort of next stages. Are alewives at or in China Lake now?
Yes. So the Department of Marine Resources has actually been stocking the lake with fish for several years. So adults have been moved into the lake where they're able to spawn and get out of the lake, but it's not great, so the fish passage out of the lake is not great. We are planning to go to construction next summer to work on the China Lake Outlet Dam, which doesn't have any form of fish passage. So to date, we have fully removed 2 dams and installed 2 large, complicated, and expensive technical fishways. So 2 dams fully removed, 2 sites with technical fishways. We have 2 more sites. One has a lot of kind of remnants of a dam, and then we have the outlet dam. So we are in this interesting and exciting time where it's the month of February. We're looking ahead at the summer, waiting to find out what the bids come in for the work that we want to do in the summer, and crossing our fingers. And what I'm going to be doing over the month of March is seeing how it all fits in place for the summer.
Great. I want to get through as many questions as possible before, because we're at 8:15. Do you know yet whether there will be success with alewives helping to reduce the algal blooms in China Lake?
I mean, anecdotally, people have said that they see improvements, and anecdotally they have from Weber Pond, but for peer-reviewed science, that takes years. But yeah, and each step along the way has been pretty interesting. I mean, when we started this project, we had people saying that the fish were not native and that we were doing something terrible by bringing them back where they didn't belong. So we actually had to go all the way to the archives in Massachusetts to find documents which predate Maine becoming a state, to show, to be able to show people that what we were doing made sense. So things take time.
Yeah, I think you've already answered this, but Mary asked, is there a way to find out when the alewives are running in the various fishways? And I think you said it was May and June, and the alewife trail, which is, can you give us that information again about where to find that information on your
Sure.
website?
So when the fish are moving is really dependent on temperature. So they have ways of feeling and knowing when the conditions are right, and that's temperature dependent and related to the length of sunlight. So I can't tell you exactly today what things are going to be like in May. It really depends from year to year. So on the Maine Rivers website, which is mainrivers.org, we have some of the two alewife trail maps that we have put together, and those have information about how to find the runs. And they range from kind of industrial, like near Fort Andros in Brunswick. The fish get collected, put in trucks, and it is actually kind of cool because there's a window and you can see the fish swimming by, but it's I think industrial is a fair word for it. And then there are places like Damariscotta where they have these just magnificent handcrafted pools. And of course, with COVID, what's normal is not now, but they have created this really wonderful event that doesn't always correspond to when the fish are actually there, but usually around Memorial Day, there's a really big fun party. And then other places are just pretty low key. It is, a very different thing to see the fish being, harvested and pulled in nets. And it's not always a beautiful thing for the alewives to end their lives going into, giant trays, but that's part of what they run into. So there are lots of different, what you see from one river stream to another may be very, very different, but all kind of cool.
Sally asked what in Maine, what dam owners' responsibilities are sort of financially or logistically to keep their dams in safe condition. Are they required to maintain their dams?
Oh, these are so exciting, these questions. So actually, there is a bill coming up in the legislature this year to strengthen Maine's dam safety program. We don't have a very good dam safety program. I salute the guy who is our lead dam safety person, John Scully. He's a great guy. He's been in his position for about a year or so, but Maine has a really, really skimpy program. And given the vast number of dams that we have, given the fact that climate change is causing more severe weather events, and things are going to continue to be kind of fast and furious, dam safety is definitely something that needs to be looked at in the state. So at this point, what are the obligations? Not a whole lot, and not enough. I mean, I once signed up for and went to a workshop for dam owners. I, of course, do not own any dams. And, it was very, it was good. They were trying to kind of get people up to speed, but it's pretty light in Maine. We can certainly learn from other states, and we should, and I think we will.
Steve asks, how do results of TNC's culvert study influence or prioritize which dam removals are most effective? Let's see, decisions are most, there's a question mark in there.
Forget
there's
yeah,
go
forget
ahead,
that
Steve.
stuff. That's just forget hitting the enter button. Question was up to the question mark.
So
Oh,
Steve,
okay.
there's I put a link in the chat to a tool that we developed that helps prioritize based on what watershed you want to work on, because I think there's a lot of people that believe that you you don't put all your eggs in one basket. We certainly know this is true for species around the state of Maine. So we'd like to see restoration in lots of places. We'd like to see restoration where it's going to have the most impact. So what this tool allows us to do is take all the information on barriers, aligns it with the streams, looks at the habitat up and downstream, where there are species in the system, and known mapped habitat for multiple species. So if you wanted to, for instance, prioritize for brook trout restoration, it might be a different looking map for your county or watershed than if you were looking for the sea run species. So all those data collected meticulously by state agencies and then stream crews, including Steve Pelletier's daughter one year, all around the state to collect these thousands and thousands of data points, which really help guide restoration and help guide. It goes into funding mechanisms. For instance, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is part of USDA, has a fund that helps private landowners restore their culverts to something that's more not only fish friendly, but river friendly. And that prioritization system that they use to fund projects relies on these metrics developed from these tools. So super handy to have the information. There isn't another state in the country that has wall-to-wall coverage like we do for dams and culverts. And it is a combination. Yes, we want the main stem passage for sure on places. Someone mentioned the Androscoggin and the Kennebec for sure, and more of the Penobscot and many other rivers, but we also need to get access into the headwaters. So we need both the headwater projects, which are often small dams and culverts, and the big dams on big rivers to be passable.
Dick is commenting on the transformation of the Androscoggin, and yet the dams remain. Are there any activities on the related to dam removal or better fishways on the Androscoggin?
There are things happening all over the place. Absolutely. There's also a huge need for things to happen more. So yeah, I know, for instance, the Maine Department of Marine Resources is doing some great work around Sabattis and the Little Androscoggin. I know that there's also some work up in the headwaters. The dam in Brunswick has significant potential for improvement. That's my diplomatic way of answering that. So
Very kind, Landis.
yeah. So there is definitely interesting and important work going on in the Androscoggin, but a lot more that can happen or should happen.
I should say that we're hoping, CREA is hoping to do some programs on the Androscoggin and its transformation, probably not until next fall, but that's sort of in the works. Chris points out as a suggestion to folks that for those that live on the water, to be cognizant of their impact on the water, put in natural barriers to erosion, revegetate shorelines. That's all really good for water quality. So that's a great suggestion. Let me just see if we've covered most. Tom asks, what information do you collect to make your decisions to balance the need for renewable energy generated by hydro versus the need to revitalize and improve waterways to restore rivers? You've sort of covered that, but it sounds like there's no new hydro makes sense. Or
no, however, so basically the hydropower operations in the state of Maine are licensed through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and those licenses are 30 to 40 years long. So when something comes up for relicensing, it's a long process that has impacts for quite a long time. So hydropower projects don't tend to just disappear. They're often, there for a long time, and it's therefore important to make sure that you do the best that you can when they are up for relicensing, and then also try and make sure that the requirements are being followed. The licensing is actually being followed. So I guess that's kind of a hard one to
Well, actually, there's a follow-on question that is sort of related. Dave says, in 2013, the total generating power of all Maine hydro dams was 762 megawatts. Is this power supply still relevant? Has the state of Maine traded wind power for hydro in an attempt to reduce dams? Also, other than Brookfield acquiring those hydro dams as an investment, is there some unknown credit or other financial incentives other than power that makes those dams a desirable investment?
That's a lot of questions packed into.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, for instance, there's a solar array up in Farmington that's just going in now. That's 78 megawatts. So that's one, and I think it's about 300 acres. So it's not small, but the challenges with hydro, and what's I think implied in Dave's question, is that there's some overarching logic to all of this. And maybe there is, on the other hand, maybe there isn't, because the ownership of the hydropower in Maine, yes, one company does own a lot of it, and yes, they are based in Toronto, so the decisions are not local, but there are lots of other smaller entities, and they make their own decisions in ways that I don't necessarily, they understand, but the rest of us don't necessarily. So it's not that there is one necessarily, universal blanket policy. It's to some degree, it's a lot of things that were set in place decades ago. For instance, one of the challenges that we see in Maine is that in the 1980s, there was a subsidy program to try and get small hydro up to speed, or to kind of encourage small operations. And so there were a number of these little really, really dinky small operations that were subsidized, put in place, and they don't have these 30-year licenses. They're just in perpetuity forever. They just go on and on and on. And those are like particularly difficult because they're so small. They don't bring in much revenue and don't have the funding to put in functional fishways. But because they don't ever come up for relicensing, they're just there forever. So sometimes one generation's good ideas can create headaches in the future. So we're,
Well, which brings me to a really excellent point that Heather makes. She says, we belong to the river does not belong to us, which is very, very well spoken. Let's see, I just want to, lots of thanks for your information. Let's see, what effect will the proposed CMP corridor have on the stream habitats, bringing Canadian hydro to Mass? Any thoughts?
Well, that's a certainly big question. I would also, before we even answer that in Maine, I would say, guess where it's had big impacts already, and that's in Quebec. So the
Huge impacts on the stream, on the delivery of sediment downstream, obviously to the Cree First Nation who were there, and also the wildlife. They've had horrible problems with migrating caribou getting wiped out by unplanned releases, or it's sort of a mess. Yet there's more power production up there. So I agree. That's where I see the most power on aquatic systems, is what's happening to those poor rivers in Quebec right now.
Yeah.
And I just want to get to this last question, and folks, feel free to drop off if you're need to get to something. But what happens to, Elizabeth asks, what happens to the character of a river upstream of a removed dam? So can you just, I know you touched on some of this, but I think there's a lot of curiosity about, when that, I remember seeing the pictures of Edwards Dam when the first waters were surging through the opening, the initial breach, but obviously it takes some time for everything to stabilize. But what is, just sort of fairly quickly, what is that?
Yeah. I mean, the simplest way to think of it is, when you have a dam, you've got basically a mill pond, a giant, well, not necessarily giant, but a large, flat, unnatural body of water. And when the dam is removed, that impoundment behind the dam disappears. And what you get instead is a free-flowing section of the river, which is generally more alive with movement, better aerated, will be more well suited for native species. The stream banks will revegetate and kind of hold in place, hopefully with native species if it's been managed that way. So it's a change. I mean, it can be a swift change, but then, the stream will, find its path again, having essentially been submerged, having been underwater, having been, having had all this impounded water on top of it. It will eventually find its way and, move through the landscape in a new way, maybe the way that it did before, or maybe in a newly emerging way, and it will tend to move nutrients and sediment through it in a less stagnant way. And that will tend to bring more life for insects, which then brings more native birds, which then connected to other wildlife. And then I pass off to Josh, who adds more to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wonderful. I've been involved in situations where we spent a lot of money planting, native species, trees, and trying to get them to root. And, then I've monitored for decades on some of these systems. And it's amazing because the native vegetation is made to float down rivers and establish in muddy banks. And it comes in remarkably quick and usually overwhelms all the work that we've done, and all the plantings that we put in usually gets overwhelmed by native trees and shrubs. They're animals moving seeds up and down. A lot of these are water transported seeds, wind transported from the side. So it's remarkable, and it's a really neat progression from sort of the early first established plants. It's spread like crazy, and then slowly you get this nice diversity coming in. So it's pretty remarkable, and it always just shocks me how quickly rivers come back. The aquatic insects, all this life that's in rivers, they're sort of used to change happening a lot. So when this change happens for the better, they respond very quickly.
There's also typically less space for graffiti when the dams are gone. I don't know.
I have an image of a fantastic time-lapse photography thing over a couple of years where a dam has been removed and just watching that vegetation come back. But it's 8:35, and I just want to thank both of you so much. This has been incredibly informative, and it's a wonderful topic. And I will send around a link to the recording, and I'll include a link to both TNC and Maine Rivers, and in particular the Alewife trail map, so that people have that, because it sounds like that would be a great activity in the spring. So thank you both so much, and thank everybody for joining us. And sorry about the technical stuff, but so such is our lives with Zoom.
Run with the bunches. Thank you so much for hosting this, Kriya and Caroline. And it's been an honor being able to speak to everyone. Thank you.
Great. All right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks a lot. It's been fun.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.